The video game crash of 1983 left the video game market dead in the water. Thanks to Nintendo and their bold marketing strategy, the Nintendo Entertainment System would revive the entire industry and cement video games as more than just a fad. This was quite the rabbit hole that took weeks of research, and I learned many surprising things about Nintendo and the video game industry as a whole that made this one console so successful. The video game industry experienced a massive rise to unprecedented popularity during the late 70s and early 80s, fueled by the golden age of arcade video games and the second generation of video game consoles. From the worldwide success of Space Invaders and its shoot-'em-up clones in arcades to the Atari 2600 and the Intellivision in North American homes, gaming had truly become a global phenomenon. Even in Japan, the Epoch Cassette Vision became the best-selling console of its time. As companies flocked to exploit this rapidly growing industry, one name rose above the rest: Nintendo. The company's R&D2 team, led by the brilliant Masayuki Uemura, began working on a home system in 1982 that would surpass its competitors both in performance and in price. Ambitiously targeted to be less expensive than its competitors, yet with performance that could not be surpassed by them for at least a year, the console began development under the codename Project Gamecom. Uemura was not content with merely sidestepping his competitors' primitive technology. He actually analyzed the inner workings of consoles such as the Atari 2600 and Magnavox Odyssey, determined to make a console that was both more powerful and cheaper than the best-selling Epoch Cassette Vision. His team of engineers, including Katsuya Nakakawa and Takeo Sawano, looked to the arcade for inspiration. They co-developed radar scope arcade hardware with Ikigama Tsushiniki, improving upon Namco's Galaxian with high-speed emitter-coupled logic-integrated circuit chips and memory on a 50 MHz printed circuit board. In layman's terms, it was a really good circuit board for the time, but Radar Scope was a commercial failure. To salvage the game's arcade hardware, they converted it for use with Donkey Kong, which became a major arcade hit. Home systems at the time were not powerful enough to handle an accurate port of Donkey Kong, so Nintendo wanted to create a system that would allow a fully accurate conversion of the games to be played in home. Meanwhile, in North America, the toy manufacturer Coleco was working on a new home console to compete with the Atari 2600. The ColecoVision was capable of handling fairly accurate ports of arcade games and left a strong impression on Sawano and Uemura, as we've already discussed. While it was a significant improvement over the Atari 2600, there was still no console comparable to the original Donkey Kong arcade hardware. Uemura sent Nakakawa and Masahiro Oitake to meet with the semiconductor manufacturer Ricoh to help build a console that was more powerful than any console at the time and was comparable to the Donkey Kong arcade hardware. The engineers brought along a Donkey Kong arcade machine for Ricoh to analyze, and the result was the creation of a custom graphics chip, the Picture Processing Unit, which was added to an inexpensive MOS Technology 6502 8-bit CPU. It was an 8-bit console. To reduce costs, suggestions of including a keyboard, modem, and floppy disk drive were rejected, but a versatile 15-pin expansion port connection was added to the front of the console for future add-on functionality, such as peripheral devices. Nintendo's innovation did not stop there. The wireless broadcast functionality of the TV Tennis Electro Tennis, released in 1975, inspired Uemura to consider adding similar capability to the Famicom. In the end, he decided to keep costs low and didn't pursue it, but many other peripheral devices would eventually connect via the expansion port, including the Famicom Light Gun, Family Trainer, and various other specialized controllers. There were several peripherals that were released in Japan only, such as the Famicom 3D system and Famicom Disk System. In the end, Nintendo's ambition and dedication to innovation paid off. Nintendo unveiled the Famicom at its own exhibition in Japan in 1983. The Famicom was designed to look like a toy, with a bright red and white color scheme and two handheld gamepads that are stored visibly at the sides of the unit. The Famicom was launched with 3 games: Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and Popeye. It initially sold well, with 500,000 units sold in the first 2 months, but many units had faulty graphics chips and froze during gameplay. Nintendo recalled all Famicom systems just before the holiday shopping season and temporarily suspended production to address the concerns, costing Nintendo millions of dollars. The Famicom was reissued with a new motherboard and easily outsold its primary competitor, the Sega SG-1000. By the end of 1984, Nintendo had sold more than 2.5 million Famicoms in the Japanese market, making it the best-selling console in Japan, surpassing the Cassette Vision. Third-party Famicom games were published from 1984 with a 30% fee paid to Nintendo per game sold, consisting of 10% as the licensing fee for the console and 20% as the production cost of new cartridges. This 30% entertainment fee became a de facto standard in consoles and storefront licensing for video game publishing all the way through the 2010s. Nintendo was riding high on the success of the Famicom in Japan and set its sights on foreign markets. The company knew it would need to convince a skeptical public to embrace its new console. With that goal in mind, Nintendo entered into negotiations with Atari to release the Famicom outside Japan under the name of the Nintendo Enhanced Video System. They planned to release the system by the end of 1983. Though the two companies had a tentative agreement, Atari refused to sign the final contract papers at the 1983 Summer Consumer Electronics Show after seeing a prototype of Donkey Kong for Coleco's forthcoming home computer system. Even though the issue was cleared up within a month, Atari's financial problems stemming from the North American video game crash of 1983 and the departure of Atari's CEO, Ray Kasser, left the company unable to follow through with the deal in time to make the target launch. In the aftermath of the video game crash of 1983, many American retailers had given up on the idea of video games, convinced they were merely a passing fad. But Nintendo of America's research showed that gamers were starting to return to arcades in significant numbers. The industry was stabilizing thanks to software conversion kit system. Hiroshi Yamauchi, the president of Nintendo, realized that North America was still a viable market for video games. And so he decided to release the Famicom to the region through the arcade industry via the Nintendo VS system. Using the same hardware as the Famicom, the VS system was an inexpensive yet versatile arcade machine that could easily port over games from the Famicom. It became a smash hit, generating a lot of excitement in the industry for its easy conversions, affordability, flexibility, and multiplayer capabilities. Titles like VS Tennis, VS Baseball, Duck Hunt, and VS Hogan's Alley became top earners, and the VS system went on to become the highest-grossing arcade machine of 1985 in the United States. By the time the NES launched in North America, nearly 100,000 VS systems had been sold to American arcades, establishing Nintendo as the industry leader in the arcade world. The success of the VS system gave Nintendo the confidence to release the Famicom in North America as a video game console, which was later called the Nintendo Entertainment System. This allowed Nintendo to build a solid launch lineup for the NES, as many games made their North American debut on the VS system before releasing for the NES. This, in turn, led to many players being amazed at the accuracy of the arcade ports for the NES, despite most VS system games originating on the Famicom. By 1986, Nintendo's president Hiroshi Yamauchi had sounded the death knell for Atari, stating that the company had collapsed because it allowed third-party developers too much freedom, resulting in a glut of substandard games. But Nintendo had learned from Atari's mistakes and was determined to control the software market for its own console. To this end, they introduced a lockout system that prevented unlicensed software from running on their system and enforced strict licensing standards, with all approved software carrying the coveted Nintendo seal of quality. To show you an example of Nintendo's seal of quality, I have here Pipe Dream, an officially licensed NES game that you can tell by there's two different licenses. This one says licensed by Nintendo for play on the Nintendo Entertainment System. And this here says official Nintendo seal of quality. You've probably seen this one before. I don't have autofocus turned on, so it's not going to focus. But all games were required to have that seal. Otherwise, they just wouldn't play on Nintendo. And I bet you can see where this one's going. Here is a game called Rolling Thunder that is not licensed by Nintendo. You can see there is no Nintendo seal of quality on this game. There is the Tengen seal of quality right here. It even says for play on the Nintendo Entertainment System. That's all it says. But it doesn't say it's licensed by Nintendo. And it just gives you the Tengen seal of quality. How did games like Rolling Thunder slip through the cracks? Well, it's super easy. All you really needed to do was get a screwdriver to turn off the lockout system to allow you to play unlicensed games. And Tengen and other companies like it simply taught players how to do this. And sometimes the games just played. There's no explanation for it. For example, my NES is not unlocked. I literally didn't bother with unlocking it. And sometimes Rolling Thunder just plays. I can't explain it. I don't think Tengen could ever explain it. But yeah, it was just cheaper to do that. These companies that couldn't afford to go through the process of licensing their games for Nintendo. Also, good luck getting Nintendo to approve of a game called Rolling Thunder. Very violent game. I mean, look, she is unconscious on the artwork for the game. Good luck getting Nintendo to approve that in the late 80s. Also, kind of a point of irony to point out, Tengen was owned by Atari. So Atari was making, ironically, unlicensed NES games in the late 80s. But back to the console itself. So Nintendo's product designer, Lance Barr, was instrumental in crafting the new look of the console. He ditched the toy-like red and white color scheme of the original Famicom and gave it a sleek, futuristic overhaul with a clean, edgy palette of gray, black, and red. The console was boxier than its predecessor, with a flat top and tapered bottom half, which housed a compartment for the wireless controllers. Nintendo's marketing strategy for the new system was to sell it as a full home computer, complete with a keyboard, cassette data recorder, and a basic interpreter software cartridge. The console was also compatible with various computer-style input devices, including gamepads, a handheld joystick, a 3-octave musical keyboard, and the Zapper light gun. Despite the system's impressive features, the American video game press was skeptical of Nintendo's chances of success in North America, and early signs weren't promising. In fact, some industry insiders had even declared the video game industry to be dead. But Nintendo refused to give up, and after months of testing the waters, they finally launched the Advanced Video System at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January 1985. Although attendees were impressed by the system's advanced technology, they were less enamored with the keyboard and wireless functionality, and no price information was given at the time. Despite the skepticism of the American video game press, Nintendo's Japanese parent company had enjoyed phenomenal success with the Famicom, selling over 2.5 million units in Japan in the previous 18 months and achieving an astounding 90% market share. And while some may have doubted Nintendo's chances of success in America, they refused to be deterred. In the summer of 1985, Nintendo made a triumphant return to the Consumer Electronics Show, revealing a sleek and cost-reduced version of their gaming console. But this was no ordinary console. Nintendo had intentionally crafted it to not look like a typical video game console. And the marketing team went all out, renaming the console the Nintendo Entertainment System, using terms like Control Deck and Game Pack for cartridges, and positioning it as an all-encompassing entertainment system rather than just a gaming console. Despite some initial disappointment with the prototype's design, Nintendo of America designers Lance Barr and Don James were able to give the NES its iconic look with a two-tone gray color scheme, black stripe, and red lettering. The top-loading cartridge slot was replaced with a front-loading chamber that hid the cartridges from view, and the controllers were redesigned with detachable wired connections. Nintendo's marketing strategy for the NES was to position it as a toy rather than a video game console, with a focus on the Zapper light gun and the robotic companion ROB, which stands for Robotic Operating Buddy. These features drew crowds to their booth at the CES, but retailers were still hesitant to distribute the console. Led by Minoru Akakawa, the president of Nintendo, a 12-person team known as the Nintendo SWAT team was sent to New York to conduct a series of test launches for the NES, having failed to secure a retail distributor in the previous year. The team made an unprecedented offer of risk absorption to retailers, offering to handle all store setup and marketing, extend 90 days credits on the merchandise, and accept returns of all unsold inventory. Retailers would pay nothing up front, and after 90 days would either pay for the merchandise or return it to Nintendo. The NES initially consisted of the deluxe set and an initial library of 17 games and was sold with Rob the Robot. Nintendo's marketing strategy worked, and the NES was a hit, selling nearly 90,000 units in 9 weeks during its late 1985 New York City test run, with 460,000 game cartridges sold in 1985. Following the success of the New York City test market, Nintendo planned to gradually release it across different U.S. states over the first 6 months of 1986, starting with California at the end of January 1986. Rob is credited as a primary factor in building initial support for the NES in North America. The NES revolutionized the home video game industry and dominated the market in the 80s with its groundbreaking technology and innovative gameplay. And in Japan, the Famicom soared to extraordinary heights with a staggering 6.2 million units by January 1986, thanks to the monumental success of Super Mario Bros. By early 1987, the Famicom had captured an astonishing 95% of the video game market in Japan, with more than 9 million units sold. Meanwhile, the NES was making waves in North America, where it sold over 1 million units in its debut year, contributing to the worldwide sales of 3 million. By 1988, the Famicom had already sold an astounding 12 million units in Japan, and the NES was poised to sell over 10 million in the United States by the end of that year. Nintendo's NES quickly became a force to be reckoned with, easily outpacing its rivals, the Sega Master System and the Atari 7800. And dominating the home video game market throughout the decade, with classic franchises like Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, and Metroid leading the way. The NES Game Pack produced blockbuster sale records. In fact, by the 1987 Christmas season, sales of the NES had outstripped even those of Teddy Ruxpin and all other original products of its American distributor, Worlds of Wonder. If you want to know more about Teddy Ruxpin and Worlds of Wonder, I made a fascinating video on that subject. Go check it out after finishing this video. The Legend of Zelda made history in 1987 as the first NES game to sell over 1 million cartridges in the United States. And with over 40 million copies sold, Super Mario Bros. Held the title of the highest selling video game for years. Super Mario Bros. 3, released in 1988, was even more successful, grossing over $500 million and selling over 7 million copies in America and 4 million in Japan, making it one of the most popular and fastest-selling standalone home video games in history. As of today, it is the 43rd best-selling video game of all time. Comment down below what your favorite NES game is. By 1990, over 27 million NES units have been sold in the United States, and the console was present in an impressive 38% of American households, surpassing even personal computers. Nintendo's success even resulted in a significant impact on the computer game industry, with many executives acknowledging that Nintendo's success has destroyed the software entertainment market. By early 1992, over 40 million units had been sold worldwide, with 30 million in the US by early 1993. In essence, the NES revolutionized the gaming industry, creating a whole new world of entertainment that captured the hearts and minds of millions of people worldwide. The impact of the NES was felt across the industry, and Nintendo cemented its position as one of the most successful corporations in Japan by 1990. The console's popularity was simply unmatched, and even Trip Hawkins, founder of Electronic Arts, hailed Nintendo as the last hurrah of the 8-bit world, and acknowledged that Nintendo had completely destroyed the Commodore 64 game market as of Christmas 1988. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. It helps me a lot. And if you want to keep following along with this series and other videos on retro gaming, smash that subscribe button and tick that notification bell. Otherwise, you might miss some exciting content from me. My name is Dylan, and until next time, happy nostalgia.